So I'm going to kind of briefly skim Fearful. You did a great job talking about it. But the key here is that Fearful clients have had experiences of extreme abuse, experiences of extreme neglect. Oftentimes clients who have a fearful attachment style have had parents who have had substance abuse issues, parents who have PTSD. A lot of times they've witnessed domestic violence. What the fearful attachment style is a lack of attachment. Like that's really fundamentally what a fearful attachment style is. When you have the dismissive attachment style, right, they know that, okay, I'm going to attach in this way. I'm not going to be that close, but I think they'll be there if I need them, right? The preoccupied client has an attachment style that says, I can open up to them pretty easily, but I don't know if they actually want to be there for me. Whereas the fearful client, they just don't really have a stable internal working model, right? They have a diffuse identity, which means a lot of times these individuals don't really know who they are, which makes them incredibly prone to further abuse. It makes them prone to, if they don't know who they are, they don't know their own feelings, it's very difficult to say, no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to involve myself in those activities. No, I don't want to enter this relationship. So they have a really, really hard time holding boundaries because growing up they essentially completely lacked boundaries. And these clients, there's a real intensity. The reason that they evoke countertransference from therapists is these clients are probably pretty unlikely for you to see these clients in their intensity in like a private practice. These clients, I think, oftentimes will be the types of clients that you would see in more kind of intense treatment facilities. Now, that being said, that's if we're talking about kind of the textbook, clear cookie cutter attachment, right? So I know this is not our attachment diagram, right? This is about parenting. But if you imagine it was, you could be secure, you could be preoccupied, you could be fearful, you could be disengaged, dismissive, but you could kind of fall all over the spectrum, right? So you might have a secure attachment, but you might kind of lean towards preoccupied, right? Or you might have a pretty secure attachment, but you might lean more towards dismissive. And so again, we want to look at attachment theory not as a diagnostic criteria where we're trying to put people in these nice 4 boxes, but we're just trying to get some sense for treatment implications. So when we notice that somebody at certain times says, come help me, come help me, come help me, and at other times is like, what are you doing? You're gonna hurt me, you're gonna hurt me, you're gonna hurt me. That helps us to see, oh, this person has very intensely shifting internal working models. They're far less adaptive than the other attachment styles because of that lack of consistency. And the key is that the caregivers were viewed both as a threat to the child emotionally at times, not just emotionally either, physically. There's a lot of times histories of physical abuse, sexual abuse. At times the parents were threatening and were the source of fear. And at other times those very same parents were actually taking care of them or caring for their needs. So there's a real confusion, right, of when they come close to people, like, okay, I don't actually know if I want to be close to you. So what this looks like in treatment a lot of times is that same ambivalence of that kind of push-pull reaction, but it's normally very, very big. The kind of classic pathology that we would think of here, the classic diagnostic would probably be borderline personality disorder, where you have very extreme responses kind of all over the place. And these clients are kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if the therapist creates space for safety, they're terrified of being abandoned and hurt. And if the therapist doesn't create safety, they feel abandoned and hurt. So what these clients really need is consistency. They need a secure base. And they need a therapist, again, who can hold the intense emotional tension. They avoid closeness, they fear rejection, they're distant and distrustful. And a lot of this does sound similarly to preoccupied attachment style, right? This kind of wanting attachment but also being afraid of rejection. But the difference with fearful attachment is that there's a lack of actually consistency, right? So there is that preoccupied sense of approach and also fear, but there's also a lot of confusing dismissive behavior as well. They're high in avoidance, high in anxiety. They present with, when they do come to attachment figures, they do have a pretty explicit, pretty clear, overt anxiety. When these clients are ready to terminate when we've helped them work through their trauma, right? So these clients oftentimes have pretty serious trauma histories, and they can be higher functioning. It really depends. Oftentimes, if clients can find an occupation that fits their needs, fits their kind of attachment style, they can thrive. But these clients typically have pretty severe trauma, and it's a longer term treatment than maybe we might typically see. So in concluding the attachment styles, there's a huge spectrum of severity, right? And at the edges of the spectrum is where it's most easy to kind of slot people into these different attachment categories, right? The more extreme somebody's environment, the more extreme the environmental adaptations will kind of show up. I think that attachment theory is a really great tool for us, but there's a danger of us becoming obsessed with attachment theory and feeling like it has all the answers and that it's going to provide the clarity that we need in treatment, and it won't. It's a helpful tool, but it's not quite the Bible. I don't even know if the Bible's that either. So there's also going to be a lot of difference between cultural perspectives of attachment, right? So certain attachment behaviors will be normed in different cultures as compared to others. And individuals will show up with a lot of different attachment styles, but typically when individuals are stressed, that's when they'll usually come up with that same attachment style. For me, when I'm really, really stressed, I kind of have a typical kind of more maybe tilting towards preoccupied, or at least I have for a long time. And maybe I've done some good work in therapy myself, because now that I think of it, I'm like, well, maybe not so much anymore. But I do know that when I get really stressed, when I get overwhelmed, I get pretty dismissive, right? Because I pull myself into this place of like, JP, you can take care of it. Like, you're competent. You can get a handle on this. You can break it down. You can sit with the problem. You can figure it out. And it's not that I'm saying like, I don't need anybody. That's not what I'm saying internally. But it just kind of automatically, I come into myself and I have a kind of mentality of like, I just got to work through this and fix it. Now, as I bring awareness to that, I realize, oh, when I'm stressed, I'm actually less likely to tell my wife, oh, I had a tough day today. When I'm stressed, I'm less likely to call my friend up and be like, hey, man, can we talk? Now that I realize that when I'm stressed, I'm like, oh, it's probably not what I would normally do, but that's actually the type of connection and attachment that I need. So as everything, really the personal awareness makes a pretty big difference. Yeah, and we will shift into any questions on attachment style. I know we've had a lot of questions, but I think it's valuable to explore it. Yeah, Nick?
Could it be possible for someone to show all
four? Sure. Yeah. Yes. Especially, so one of the things you'll see is different, depending on the caregivers, individuals can have different attachment styles towards different genders. Right, so if mom was, if I developed a preoccupied relationship with mom, but I kind of had like a dismissive relationship with dad, which is probably like pretty common, and that was really strong and intense, then I pretty likely, and I noticed this myself, right, in kind of areas that have to do with, well, I mean, it makes sense, right? I relate differently to women than I do to men, but as I've worked through my own process, I've realized like, oh, like when I'm around women, all my mom issues come up. You know, and when I'm around men, all my dad issues come up. And they're kind of subtly different issues. And that's because I have different types of attachment. So they can come up in different contexts. Yeah. Mia.
Are psychologists looking into developing a fifth attachment style?
Not that I've heard of. No, what makes you ask?
These are the standards that we use in counseling or no?
Attachment theory is a theory, right? So there's a lot of different theories as well, but attachment theory is a theory that has come with widespread empirical support that we can pretty consistently say people typically end up attaching in these different ways. Other theories would say differently, right? So internal family systems theory. What internal family systems theory says, which we covered briefly, they say that it's not this ingrained attachment, but rather it's a part that learned to defend themselves in that way that's stuck in the driver's seat. And if you can actually help that part to unload the burden, you can change what presents as the attachment style. Because they would say attachment style is really just a collection of interpersonal defenses in a kind of systemic way. So I don't really know. It's pretty widely supported, and I don't know many psychologists or therapists who would say attachment theory isn't true. But I would say that I think it's still in development. So perhaps not so much different categories, but shifting the way we look at the different categories. Yeah. Now, what is a pretty contentious subject is what attachment means. Attachment is relatively fixed, but it can change. It takes a lot of work to change. But what the attachment theorists believe is that as a therapist, we are creating a secure attachment with the client, and what the client then does is they internalize the secure attachment that we've created, and they have it themselves. So the attachment theory holds that clients need an experience, that there's kind of an attitude that the therapist gives something to the client that the client doesn't have in attachment, and then the client is able to take that with them. There's other theories, IFS being one of them, that says, hey, we don't need to give the client something that they don't have. The client has all of the things that they need inside of themselves. We just need to learn to teach the client how to access them. Is that splicing hairs? Maybe, but they think those distinctions are pretty important. I don't know that they are. Either way, it usually looks like us doing the same thing. Yeah. Cool. So let's look at parenting styles. So remember, broadly, when we look at conceptualization, what we're seeking to understand is, who can tell me any of the three things that we're seeking to understand, the kind of three questions we're asking in conceptualization, or the three broad areas we're exploring?
I think we can say the client, we need to know exactly what issue he has in his childhood.
Yes.
And the second, we need to know how the client interact with people about with this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And the third, the therapist
Mm-hmm.
need to work on it with him.
Exactly, yes. We're looking at how did these problems develop in childhood, in the family of origin. What is the developmental context in which these problems came about? Secondly, how are these problems maintaining now? How are these problems showing up in the current everyday interactions that this client has with the significant others in their life? And thirdly, how are those problematic interaction patterns coming up with the therapist in treatment? And we believe it's the problematic interaction patterns that are leading to the depression, that are leading to the anxiety. The anxiety itself isn't the problem. It's the symptom, right? It's a manifestation of the problem. And so if we look at the anxiety, we try to treat the anxiety as such. A lot of times we can reduce the anxiety, there's a phobia, it can pop up in a different place. So we want to see that, okay, that anxiety is actually a result of problematic interpersonal patterns. If we resolve the issue from the source, that anxiety will dwindle and disappear. So in development, in childhood, in the current interactions with the client's peer group or social support, and how do these problems show up in the relationship with the therapist? Is that a question, Charles? No, looked like a questioning look. If you had a question, it would have been prime. So we're looking at these three different styles of attachment. Authoritarian, permissive, disengaged, and authoritative. Yeah. Now, I did not come up with this. A professor taught it to me, but it's a helpful way to remember the difference between authoritarian and authoritative because they both sound the same. But think of authoritarian librarian. That's the key to remembering what authoritarian means. Authoritarian librarian, right? Librarians oftentimes can be kind of characterized, and this is probably not a fair characterization, as cold and kind of mean and kind of just like, shh, like don't say anything, right? So authoritarian librarian is how you remember that authoritarian is the bad one, right? That's not the good one as compared to authoritative. But when we look at parenting styles, we see that there's these different quadrants created off of control and affection, right? So control is how much impact the parent places an emphasis on. Control is how is controlling kids' behavior. I was going to try to figure out a way to explain control without the word control, but control is control is control is control. We all know what control is. And affection is care, emotionality, expressions of love. Now, for the record, protection is a form of control, right? Telling your kid, hey, I don't want you to go out into the street without looking both ways, right? That's a protective response. Or saying, hey, you can't go and walk around the mall by yourself when you're 7. That's a protective response. But it is controlling, right? So I want to invite us to kind of neutralize the word control. It's easy to look at the word control as, oh, control is bad. Control is not in itself bad. It's just a type of human behavior. Now, when control is obsessive, or when control is rigid, or when control is intense, or when the control blocks the other individual from acting as an autonomous human, well, then it may be problematic. But when we're looking at, okay, how does the caregiver and the child interact on a kind of emotional level in developing attachment? And here we're looking at like kind of what are the typical parenting rules? What's the kind of general theory that each parent has behind what they're doing and why they're doing it? And we see that across cultures, parents put different levels of emphasis on how important it is to control children and what type of what affection should look like, right? Some parents think, okay, you just need to shower your child in endless adulation and praise. That's how you build up self-esteem. It's actually not, but that's what they think, right? So they're high in affection. Some parents think, okay, my child needs to do exactly what I tell them to. Because if they don't do exactly what I tell them to, down to the very last moment, they're not doing what they should. And so when we look at control, we have these 4 different styles. Authoritarian parents are high in control, So they believe that it's very important for their children to be controlled by them. They think they should be in charge. They place a really great emphasis on following rules, on strictness. These are letter of the law people, right? Oh, sorry, so sorry. Here we are. Authoritarian. Yes. Cool. Authoritarian parents are high in control. They're telling kids what to do. These parents typically have pretty strict, pretty rigid boundaries. Think of German people, right? My family is German. Friends of mine that are German. You see a German area and you can see a kind of oftentimes characterized as pretty controlling and lower affection, right? So somebody who is growing up in an authoritarian family, these are the individuals who might say things like, well, I knew I was loved, right? My parents didn't say it, but I knew I was loved growing up. Like I knew that they loved me. How did they know? Typically because parents provided, parents were there. And that's not to say, I want to be clear here, what we're not saying is, oh, some parents love their children and some parents don't, right? What we can look at the parenting styles as is how parents see the best way to express their love for their children. Some parents believe that it's better to give pretty much free, open reign. Some parents feel like it's better to have more control. The expectations and rules are pretty clear. The consequences for behaviors are also very clear. They rarely engage in mutual, respectful communication that involves explanation, right? So I remember when I was younger, right? Trash day was on Tuesday. I had to take out the trash. And my dad's like, you need to take out the trash tonight. And I said, well, why? I could just take it out in the morning. And his response was, well, you need to take out the trash. I said, but I could just take it, and it just was this back and forth, right? Me saying like, hey, I don't think really it makes a difference between the morning and the evening, right? And this is me as a child kind of coming into my own, kind of trying to develop critical thinking, probably pretty bratty too. And it kind of usually got to the point where my dad would say, you need to take the trash out because I said so, right? Because I'm the dad and you need to listen to me, right? So that would be a type of, now he wasn't crushingly punitive, like, what the hell's wrong with you, in that moment. He was just saying like, hey, when push comes to shove in my relationship with the children, you need to do what I say because I said it. And that's how this family works. So that's a kind of look at what an authoritarian style would be. Clients from authoritarian parents, and again, just like on the attachment style, you can kind of be all over this spectrum in intensity, right? You could be authoritarian to the level of abuse and neglect, right? To where if you don't do what I say, you're going to get the belt, and the belt is really just abuse. Or you could be, like the kind of thing of like, well, you just have to do it because I said so, right? That's still an authoritarian stance, but there's a huge difference, and that's going to have a huge difference on children. So just like with attachment style, we can be pretty all over the place in terms of intensity. Children from authoritarian parents who become adults learn to hide vulnerability from themselves and others during moments of distress. What attachment style does this sound like? Hiding vulnerability in moments of distress. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So this would be a dismissive attachment style, saying, okay, when things are going bad, I'm not going to bring my emotions to you, because when I bring my emotions to you, there's just no response, right? Or this is a kind of authoritarian, the attitude of kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? It's a pretty common kind of conservative, psychologically conservative mentality of, people just need to work hard and push through things, and you should be able to pull yourself up from your bootstraps, and you need to be able to control your emotions. This is the kind of thing that would be said often. You need to have strong willpower. That's kind of tilted in that authoritarian direction. They tend to keep people at a distance. They often internalize anger and have a difficulty coping with frustration. And why would these clients of children of authoritarian parents internalize the anger and turn it towards themselves? Why would they do that? You could never express it. Yeah, I remember one time I was listening to an interview with Kevin Hart. This was a couple years ago, between 5 and probably more than 5 years ago. But I was listening to an interview with Kevin Hart, and I was like, first of all, I was like, wow, this guy's got a really good head on his shoulders. I'd never seen him not acting in some really cheap, somewhat funny, somewhat stupid spy movie or whatever with The Rock, But it was like, dude, this guy's got a head on his shoulders. And he said, when I tell my kids to do something, or I discipline or that I punish them, I give a space afterwards to say, hey, what do you think about that? Like, how do you kind of feel about the punishment? How do you feel about, what happened? Or it was something along those lines. And I was like, at first I was like, dude, what the hell? Like, why are you letting your kids walk all over? That's what I heard, right? Because I probably tilted at that time towards, authoritarian is what you should be. But it struck me, and it kind of sat with me, and what he was saying is, I want my kids to be able to talk about their frustrations with me. Now, they still have to go to their room, or they still have to take out the trash, or they still have to do whatever chore or discipline or consequence it is. That's not changing. Just because they say, oh, I'm mad at you, Dad, I'm not going to say, oh, okay, well, I won't punish you then so that you like me, right? That would be a permissive parent. But it's saying, I'm going to hold the boundary, but I'm also going to give space for your anger, because if you can express your anger to me, I can show you, hey, dude, it's okay to be angry. But we do need to learn what's a healthy way to express anger to your dad, and what's an unhealthy way to express anger with your dad. And I want to guide you in that healthy expression of anger. And so that would be an authoritative kind of parental style with high control, but also high warmth and care. They're more likely to be anxious, depressed, and have low self-esteem and use self-defeating behaviors. Why would these children likely have low self-esteem? Yes, Mina.
Because they've been let down. Well, not let down. They've been like when a kid explains themselves or brings an opinion, whether it's about an argument or a subject, they'll tell them, oh, you don't know anything, you're just a kid.
Yeah, exactly. Because these children have not been given the opportunity to exercise competence, right? Imagine how it feels when somebody micromanages work that you're doing, right? You're doing some work and they say, oh, actually, you need to do it this way. Oh, actually, you need to do it this way. Oh, actually, you need to do it this way. Oh, actually, you need to do it this way. At the end of that project, when you turn it in, are you feeling confident in what you put forward? No, because you have no ownership over it. Yeah.
I was actually kind of thinking about this yesterday, or in the same realm, and when you're say you're planning to do a chore as a kid, and then your mom or dad tells you to do it, and you're planning to do it, and then they tell you to do it, and you're like, now I don't want to do it at all.
Yeah.
Is that a similar theme, I guess, or it's in that autonomy is being taken away when you're told what to do, when you have that intention, and the intention is overridden by your parents.
Yes.
Yeah.
What we would look at that as, so when, this phenomenon of somebody tells me to do something, and all of a sudden I don't want to do it. I wanted to do it before, and now I don't want to do it. What that is what we would consider that as an oppositional defense. So that's an interpersonal defense, whereby I'm moving away from you because you're trying to control me. And so that's the type of defense that would make sense. If I'm controlled all the time, I might develop a schema that it's more important for me to feel freedom than it is for me to do what I actually want to do. Right? So I want to go mow the lawn today because it's a nice day. And then Dad says, yeah, you got to mow the lawn. And I'm like, dude, I do not want to do that today. Because what's more important than me liking mowing the lawn is me having a sense of my own individuality and saying, I don't like being controlled. So that's the type of defense that would develop in that context. Yeah.
How do parents approach this situation?
Don't let it start. Because that's a symptom, right? Now, part of that is just kids will grow up and do that. But how do parents usually respond in that situation? When parents say take a right and kid says, "Oh yeah, I'm going to take a left," how do parents usually step in those situations?
I feel like in a controlling manner, like,
Yeah.
no, you're gonna do what I said.
No, you're going to do what I said. And what does the kid say?
They're like, well, they'll either give in, like, grudgingly,
Yeah.
and then just, like, be angry, and
Yeah.
then there will be, like, some awkward tension between the parent and the child,
Yeah.
or the child will, like, rebel even more.
Yes.
And, like, make themselves bigger.
Yeah, right. So this is the same thing that happens with resistance with our clients, right? Our clients say, "Oh, I don't want to share that. That's personal." Well, you should. You should share it with me. And now the client goes, "Dude, now I definitely don't want to share it with you because you've got some chip on your shoulder about me opening up," right? This is that same thing that says, "Hey, don't control me. I want to be respected." And so the flaw that parents often make is that when their children try to exercise their autonomy, they see it as a threat to themselves rather than seeing it as a developmentally normal and healthy, appropriate behavior for the child to learn that their own voice and their own thoughts and their own beliefs. Now, that being said, it is still important for the parent to protect, to take care of. The parent is still the authority in the home. But what do we think authority means is what we're talking about. Like, does authority mean you do whatever I say? Or does authority mean there's some level of interaction about what the rules are and why they make sense? So the key is when children are operating oppositionally, one of the biggest things is you want to bring awareness to what they're doing, right? So you want to help them realize, hey, Dad's asking you to go clean your things up, and you're continuing to play. It's like you're doing the exact opposite of what I'm asking you to do here. And then you provide consequences and choice, right? You have a choice here. You can continue to play with your toys. And if you continue to play with your toys, then tomorrow you won't be able to play with your toys at all because you're breaking the rules here. Or you can put your toys away right now. We can continue along with your day, and you can play with them after dinner, right? So you actually give the child the choice. Parents cannot control children. You can't control children. You can't control other people, even children. You can't control other people. The best that parents can hope for is really good cooperation. And so the role of parenting is, hey, can I create a climate where I'm communicating, hey, we can cooperate. I'm the parent, I'm the driver's seat, I make the final call, but I don't need to stake my identity as a human in being in control of my child. Rather, I can place more emphasis on helping my child grow up and adapt to the world. Yeah, Rose.
So, okay, I don't have like a specific question. I'm trying to figure out like how to word this because I'm more just kind of like I'm a little bit confused about how the whole idea of like wanting independence. So okay, basically I'm trying to figure this out in my head. So basically, is it that? Because I thought with the dismissive attachment style, like the want to like have independence.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially comes from like that being expected of you, like as a child. Like I thought it was more like the parents would be like, oh, you should be able to do this on your own.
Mm-hmm.
The child starts to believe that. But I want to make sure I understand.
Correct.
Because what I'm hearing is that it's like if the parent is not allowing the independence, like if they're wanting to do everything for the child, would that, maybe I'm not understanding it, but were you saying that it's like that results in the dismissive because it's like the child is not so much being told that they should be independent, but they're wanting it because they're not given that? Because I thought that that would result in more of a preoccupied attachment style because the kid is is used to expecting everyone to do everything for him. But I guess would that instead make the kid be like, oh, actually I don't like that, I want to have more independence, and then dismissive, or I just haven't get a hard time.
Yeah. So I think maybe the helpful thing to look at here is that these aren't perfect corollaries of each other. Parental style and attachment style do not kind of line up perfectly. Now we can see that a disengaged parent or authoritarian parent is likely to create a dismissive attachment style. Like that kind of goes with the theme. But maybe a more helpful way to look at this is parenting styles is more about how, when we look at attachment, it's more about how does the child attach to the caregiver? And when we look at parenting styles, it's how does the parent relate to the child? That might like sound like, oh, it's just the same thing, but it's kind of like the angle of reference that we're looking at. And so multiple things could result in the same attachment style. But the reason these clients, the authoritarian parents, are likely to create a dismissive attachment style is a little bit less about how they're controlling and a little bit more about the lack of emotion and the high control. So it's the combination of control and a lack of emotionality that creates that style. But I would say they don't perfectly overlap. And so I hear you saying like, wait, shouldn't these things connect more clearly? And probably, yeah, someone should probably you could create a better theory. And I'm totally serious, that like connects, and this is also something, I'm not an expert in attachment, so I might be missing something here too, but yeah, that's my answer. Does that make sense?
So basically, it's like it is possible for someone to end up, dismissive?
Yeah.
Yes, dismissive attachment style, either from like being told that they shouldn't be independent, or like as a reaction to not being independent, like that becomes kind of both.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, a child could learn compulsive independence because they are overly meddled with by parents, right? So yeah, there's a sense in which a preoccupied parent could lead to a child developing a dismissive attachment style because it's like, Mom, get away from me. A child could internalize that as too much. So if a child is overwhelmed by the emotion, that might make sense that in certain circumstances they might just shut the emotion down totally. Yeah, so that makes sense. So you could get dismissive probably two different ways. I think it's less likely that a dismissive attachment style would come from over-involvement, but it's certainly a possibility if the circumstances are right. Yeah.
Going back to you saying like give the children a choice, I guess I'm just like thinking about, I've always heard like, I don't know if it's like a difference between like children's age, but like I'm thinking of like my 2.5-year-old nephew, where like if you're like, hey, do you want to go change your diaper? Like he's gonna be like, no, and like start kicking and screaming.
But you're not asking them. So here's the thing. You're setting yourself up with that question for failure.
Okay.
Right?
Because I've heard in like, you shouldn't give them a choice. Just be like, we're gonna change your diaper, or like it's time to go to bed, or like,
sure.
Do you want to like clean up your toys to eat dinner? Like, no,
Yeah.
It's time to clean up your toys so we can eat dinner.
So if we look at one of these situations out of context, it could kind of break a lot of different ways. But we're looking at an overall environment, and what we want to have is high emotional warmth and high control, right? But what I would say there is if you ask the kid, like, hey, do you want to go clean your room? The kid every time is going to say no, and then you're going to feel disappointed because it's like, well, I gave them a choice, and they chose something that I don't want them to do. And so you give them a choice, but you give them two choices. You can go clean your room right now, or you can choose to not go clean your room right now, and the consequence will be that you're not allowed to play after dinner. That's the choice that you give. So you're selecting what their options are. You're not saying, hey, do whatever you want, right? That would kind of be a permissive style, right? That sounds like somebody who has a more of a permissive parenting style, which is kind of like, I'm going to try to tell my kid what I want them to do, and I hope they'll do it because I'm kind of too scared to tell them that they have to do it whether they want to or not. Yeah.
I'm sorry if I'm diving too deep into this, just let me know. But
Sure.
now I'm thinking of like the different ages that I've seen
Mm-hmm.
and the different acts they've been, and I'm just trying to make up like the style you're mentioning, which is let's say the right style to propose something that should be done. To what age can you extend that? I'm pretty sure you can't use that with teenagers.
Yeah, you can. But
Well, imagine a rebellious teenager. You give them a choice like that, they're gonna laugh at you.
and there should be consequences. You have the choice of, you can choose to do this and these are the consequences, or you can choose to do this and these are the
So you're
consequences.
saying this is the best way to approach things that can sound controlling to anyone.
Say that again.
So like for instance, if you're telling someone to do their chores, which is
Yeah.
something that they might deem that is controlling to them, the best way to approach such a situation is by giving them two choices.
Mhm.
Both choices are gonna have their own consequences and benefits.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best rule of thumb. Now, there may be times that you just sit down and you say, hey, buddy, like, you have to do the dishes. I'm sorry, I know that's hard, but like it's part of how we chip into the family. And I'll sit with you and I'll do the dishes here with you because I know it's hard, but I need you to do it. Right? So there are times, right? But I think a rule of thumb is that giving children a choice is helpful. Because really what you're doing is what you're reflecting to the child is the truth and the reality of the situation of they have a choice. They always do. They could go kicking and screaming. They could come up and kick you in the shins. They could run away. Like, children actually always do have a choice. Now, they might not feel like it, but what we're doing is simply over and over and over again reflecting to the child, hey, you actually have a choice here to do whatever the hell you want. But let's see if we can work together to make the choice that you choose a good one. I want to support you by helping you to see the consequences of your actions so that you learn how to make choices that have a thought for what's happening right now, what's happening in the future, and what are my responsibilities. Cool. Felicity, we probably won't do a role play today. Maybe we'll bump it to the beginning of next class. Cool. I just want to let you know, so any anxiety. Okay, so the permissive parenting style has a often high in warmth, nurturing, and communication, but they don't place appropriate expectations for mature independence on the children, right? So this is the opposite, right? You have low control and high affection. This is kind of typically what's thought of as laissez-faire parenting. It's kind of like, hey, they can kind of have their place. And a lot of times these parents may have been raised by authoritarian parents, and so it's kind of like a counter reaction of, my parents were so strict that I could never breathe. And now they say, I'm never going to do that to my kid. But really the reality is that the kids just kind of walk all over them. Now the problem with this is that that's actually incredibly unsafe for a child, right? If you get a job out of college and in the contract there's no delineated hourly expectation, right? You get a salaried job and you say, well, how many hours a week am I expected to work? I don't know. As many as you want, I guess, right? Now, at first that might sound like, awesome, there's total flexibility, right? At first that might feel really good to kind of have that liberty and have no boundaries, especially coming right out of college where that's pretty much most of what you've had. But sooner or later, it's very likely that you're going to start thinking, am I doing enough? Am I doing too much? How do I know if I'm really doing what's expected of me? If there's no boundary, how can I know whether or not I'm fulfilling the expectation or not? And so boundaries actually create safety because the boundaries help us to know what's in the boundary and appropriate and welcome and okay, and what's out of the boundary. And so these parents have a great difficulty communicating expectations to their children. These children also typically grow up to be pretty demanding, pretty self-centered, because if their parents are constantly kind of responding to their every whip and whim, they're not learning that mom can't answer every problem and fix everything for me. Again, right, children, we do not want to teach children that parents are Superman. I mean, of course that's normal. That's a natural developmental period. But we don't want to try to sustain that. What we want to teach our children is that we are imperfect, but loving, caring individuals. that although we're imperfect and we make mistakes sometimes, we can really show up when it counts. And if we don't show up when it counts, we can apologize for that and repair the relationship. Again, with our clients don't need to think that we're perfect, but our clients do need a realistic experience of somebody who cares, somebody who's reliable, and they need a realistic expectation that every relationship has ruptures. We don't have to be afraid of ruptures. They can be difficult, they can be uncomfortable, but ruptures can be repaired. And essentially, permissive parents just allow their children to do whatever they want, and it doesn't allow the child to develop a sense of personal boundaries. It doesn't allow the child to develop a sense of reciprocity about what do other people need, right? If mom's always giving them whatever food they want, well, when they go over to the neighbor's house, right? This actually happened to me, right, when I was younger. So my dad tilted towards authoritarian, right? And my mom tilted towards permissive, right? So I remember going to my friend's house, the Sanfords, and I went over there. I was younger. I don't know how old I was, but I was pretty little. And we were having apples as a snack. And I was like, oh, well, I don't eat them with the skin on. I'm like a little kid, you know. I'm like, I don't eat like apples with the skin on. Like my mom like peels it off, you know, for me. So like, I'm not gonna eat that, right? And that was because, right, if I told my mom, I don't want to eat the skin, she probably would have been like, okay, I'll peel it for you, right? And that's like a pretty benign thing, right? But essentially, I was experiencing another parent. I was like, why aren't you kneeling to my every beck and call? Peel the damn apples, lady. I don't want to chew anything. I just want sugar and sweetness, and you know, like, come on. And so that was a moment where I was used to kind of maybe being able to get what I wanted or felt like I needed by maybe turning up the volume in that hyperactivating style, right? Crying louder. And it actually created socially that parent, she was actually very, very sweet, very nice. But if I was a parent, I probably wouldn't have wanted me to really come back over. I'd have been like, dude, I don't want to. This kid's saying that he has like some type of health allergy to the skin. It's like, no, he doesn't. It's freaking apple skin. Like, come on. So, but it develops a type of self-centeredness because there's not a realistic experience, that there's limitations for what you can have, what needs you can have met from other people. Yeah, Alex.
Is it possible for one parent to be on two extremes, like to express two extreme types of parenting style?
I think so, yeah.
Authoritarian, and then like they like feel bad about it, so then they go permissive, but then they don't like explain.
Yeah, I think so.
Like I see that in my mom.
Yeah,
Like, a
yeah.
lot.
Yeah, well, I'm sure everybody's seeing a lot of things in their moms and dads right now. You know, yeah, right. It's that would make a lot of sense, and this kind of almost speaks to like a fearful attachment. Maybe not like in that extreme, but it's kind of like, okay, I'm strict, but then I feel really bad about being strict. So it's like, oh, okay, you can have the apple, right? Whatever it is, right? So that you can have some oscillation. Typically, what you'll see, just like with attachment styles, though, when there's stress in the system, parents will kind of resort to one, typically. Right, so my dad he's very warm, he's very kind, but when kind of push came to shove, it was like, well, I'm the dad, so you have to do what I say. So it's like, there were times when it was like, you know, for me as a little kid, it was like, he doesn't care about my thoughts or my opinion or whatever, because he's like, take out the trash, because I said so. And I'm like, that's so ridiculous, I could take it out in the morning, you know. But he's also very warm and very caring, that, like, you know, overall. So if it was like every single thing, every single time, that's gonna create a different attachment, but there's gonna be things across the board. Yeah, Mina.
If we can shift towards the future, and so I would assume the first step you would take with your partner is when you decide to have kids is establish one type of parenting, like agree on parenting and how you're gonna, because I assume that when you have two different parenting, like two different parents using two different parenting styles, it's confusing for the child.
Yes.
You're expecting both.
Possibly, but it could turn out a lot of different ways, right? I think it actually probably would have been, if my mom was more authoritarian, I think I probably would be a less adjusted child. right? Because my mom was kind of permissive and my dad was authoritarian, so it kind of balanced out. But it did create problems because it was like my mom was like, "Oh, wait till your dad gets home," which meant I could pretty much terrorize the house and do and say whatever I wanted because my mom was pretty much telling me, "I don't want to discipline you. I'm going to let your dad discipline you." So right there wasn't that balance, but kind of in the long-term trajectory, it turned out okay. The short answer is though, yes. I mean, the short answer is you and your partner go to therapy and work out your stuff because then you won't need to result to any of these extremes.
In my
Yeah.
situation, it was the opposite of yours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
My mom was more of the
Yeah.
authoritarian.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to do something, let's say I'm grounded
Yeah.
and I want to do something,
Yeah.
I'm not going to go to my mom. And
Yeah.
even if I go, she's going to say no.
Yeah.
I'll go to my dad, he's going to say yes, and then I just leave it on my dad to deal with my mom.
Yeah, right. So that'll come up. It'll happen. And it'll be interesting as we talk too about kind of how these things get passed down intergenerationally, right? Because it's likely that, you know, the relationships that we have with our parents, without realizing it, we create the same types of relationships with our children. So, but yeah, I think I think the key is talking often about how we're parenting and being on the same page. Yeah, because I think it is, and I think it's kind of a classic, probably boomer thing of like parents get pretty easy to play parents against each other, and this kind of image of one parent being, you know, super strict and one parent being more permissive. It makes sense, right? Because the permissive parent is going to be really attracted to the person that has more of a strength in standing on their boundaries. And somebody who stands strong in their boundaries is going to be attracted to a partner that's a little bit more loose and a little bit more free-flying, right? So it happens, yeah.
So like a child that grows up to be have kind of like a fearful attachment, right? These kids usually kind of have like this disorganized like attachment style, right?
Yes, yeah. Fearful is disorganized, yeah.
So do you think like if a parent was like kind of like warm and like kind, similar to how you describe your dad, very authoritarian in like other ways that could contribute to a child potentially being fearful or disorganized?
Children that are fearful or disorganized probably have very few attachment figures that have emotional warmth or appropriate emotional warmth. So I would say typically individuals who have a fearful attachment style or who are in childhood disorganized will have disengaged parents, right? Where there's not a lot of affection, not a lot of control, maybe the kind of situation where people are coming and going from the house a lot. There's a lot of vulnerability. So the short answer is I think the security, if that parent was overall, had the warmth and the strength, I think that would actually probably look more like authoritative and probably move more towards a secure attachment, if that makes sense.
Does attachment play out with the death of the caregiver? At like certain ages, is there distinction? Like you can still hold the attachment if it's later in your life, but if it's earlier, like you don't have an attachment.
Yeah.
formed yet, so.
It's a great question. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think if you have sufficient time to form an attachment with them, then you can almost hold on to the strengths and weaknesses that you had with them.
Yeah.
But if it's too early in life, then I think there's more of a proclivity to like shift one way or another.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it depends on the theoretical lens, right? The psychodynamic therapists would have a lot to say about a parent dying at any age. And I think they would say, or something like, they have a lot to say about adoption and psychologically how that affects someone's attachment. But attachment happens early. Attachment is happening before we even know it's happening, right? It's happening right off the bat. It's happening in the first couple days. It's happening in the first couple years. So yes, if a child's long-term trajectory, if perhaps their mother dies when they're 2 years old, but they have a secure attachment with their mother, they are going to have a much more likelihood to maintain a secure attachment over time, just because how important attachment is early. And I think that carries on. So just like everything, the quality of the attachment actually I think is probably more important than the length of the attachment as experienced. But I think death and loss introduces a whole different kind of dynamic there. Yeah.
Can I give my opinion on that?
Sure.
If you look at it from a different point of view, just because a kid that has a secure attachment with their mom passes away early on, it can create kind of resentment
Yeah.
towards their mom.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
it's gonna be the responsible of the other parent or the other caregiver how they deliver the news and how
Yeah.
they're gonna process that with the child. Because if a parent is just gonna tell the kid that your mom passed away and leave
Yeah.
the kid alone, the kid is gonna have the whole mentality that my mom left
Right.
me alone.
Because that would be a dismissive attachment, right? And then the child is left on their own. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it also depends on the other parent. and how they-
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it has a huge, what also it really depends on is there another attachment figure that can step in there, right? Maybe it's an aunt, maybe it's a grandmother, maybe it's a couple years later or a time different. The father has a new wife, right? So it can look a lot of different ways, but kind of like you're saying, Mina, the quality of the attachment is going to determine the long-term quality of the attachment. And the quality of the attachment is going to be part of how does that news get delivered. But you will see, so something like somebody who experiences death because of drug overdose or something like that, that introduces especially resentment, anger, abandonment, feelings like, did mom love drugs more than me? Did mom even want me? So these are experiences that you guys all as therapists sooner or later will come to see. Yeah.
I think it's clear for me to say that permissive children grown into adults have a tough time succeeding in life because they expect everything to be done for them, and like usually the high affection
Yeah.
like translates to having things done. Usually,
Yeah.
like I would say like a permissive parent would be like, oh, you want to have this, like go ahead and take it
Yeah.
like, at a store or something like that.
Yeah. What's the trend right now on what's the parenting trend? Gentle parenting. Kind of like, yeah, like you can kind of well, I think what people describe when they're talking about gentle parenting is what they want to say is we want to be secure, but they miss like gentle parenting with firm boundaries. Right? And so I think that turns into like right, like, oh, do you want me to pick you up right now? Like do you like it creates is narcissism, right? So it could kind of affect in two ways, but I think Gen Z and Alpha generation under them have been overindulged oftentimes because I think generationally millennials often were over-controlled culturally, right? By boomers were kind of over-controlling, which makes sense coming out of like the deprivation of the Great Depression, right? You're gonna be pretty controlling when there's 3 beans to eat for dinner and 3 people, right? You know? And so you can see how there's kind of these generational shifts in parenting style. And now as well, there's a woman named Abigail Strickler, something like that. She has a book called Bad Therapy. And one of the things that she's talking about is how there can be a really problematic effect of the kind of therapy culture of like what therapy can, a culture of therapy can tend towards a permissiveness of like, well, your feelings are more important than the rules, right? Your feelings are more important than the guidelines, right? If you felt like you were late to work, you should have sped, and so now you don't get a ticket. And it's like, wait a minute, like what that creates is what we're experiencing culturally, which is like actually greater fear when the boundaries become diffuse. So I think it certainly probably leads to a decreased tenacity, right? Because these children struggle with emotional regulation because they never had to regulate their emotions because they could get whatever they wanted. They struggle with delayed gratification because they never had to delay their gratification, right? I didn't have to delay my gratification. It's like, Mom, can can I have ice cream for breakfast? It's like, yeah, sure. It's like, okay, great, right? Like, if that's what the kind of climate is, how am I going to learn that, like, okay, yeah, like I need to have a healthy diet and take care of myself. So there's I think that's accurate to say that these children oftentimes struggle. This is also kind of what will, safe to say. Yeah. So I cut you off as well as you were finishing speaking. Did you have some other thoughts there?
That was good.
Yeah, cool.
That was fine.
Cool. And then they lack perspective on their own behavior, right? So they have a hard time seeing, like, why was this person pissed off at me? I don't know what I did. I just told them to deliver my pizza at this time, at this place, exactly on the moment, and they didn't, so I yelled at them, and it's like, and you'll hear this, right? And especially as you guys are entering into the field, you guys will be working a lot with Gen Z, right? And the Alpha generation, right? That you'll hear a lot of parents who experienced authoritarianism in their parenthood. So now they kind of have this tilt towards control, but they're like kind of trying to be permissive because they think gentle parenting is kind of what they need to do. And then their kids are falling apart, and then they're trying to kind of step back. And so it's almost like, you know how fearful is a little bit of like kind of the worst of two sides. I think a lot of parents don't have a clear model of how, like kind of you were saying, I mean, it's very important to know, like, well, what are my fundamental beliefs in parenting? And then you have disengaged. So disengaged parents, there's inconsistent or erratic discipline. The parents are often too absorbed in their own problems, perhaps chronically depressed, higher levels of pathology. They have the children of these parents have more problems with substance abuse. One of the ways that we can look at substance abuse is an attachment relationship, right? Substance abuse can act to completely organize your life, right? If you don't have any sense of coherence to your life, or you don't know what you want to do when you wake up, you don't know what you want to do, all of a sudden you experience substance, it gives you this affection, right? And substances, especially things like, when you listen to people talk about what it's like to be high on heroin, right? They talk about this euphoria of connection, right? So all of a sudden, there's this kind of experience of affection from the substance, right? The substance provides this emotional space and warmth and pleasure and safety. And also there's high control, because it's like, okay, well now I got to get my life, my schedule organizes around when can I get the substance of abuse, when can I consume them. So I don't think that individuals who experience addiction think in this way, but you can see how individuals who didn't have somebody to tell them what to do and how to act in a helpful way and also provide guidance and care and support would gravitate towards something that's going to be all-consuming, it's going to tell them how to live their lives, that's also going to provide a really big experience of emotional space. And so lower psychological well-being, they'll expect the therapist to be disinterested or disdainful of them, to see themselves as unworthy of the therapist's attention. These clients experience both a lot of neglect, and in that neglect, that opens up the space for abuse. Because they haven't been protected, they don't develop a sense of self-protection. Because they haven't been taught, here's the boundary and you shouldn't cross it because it's dangerous for you, they don't know when people are crossing their boundaries and being dangerous to them. And then we have authoritative parents, which it's hard to not look at this stuff like, oh, that's a good one. But these parents are high in control and protection, but they're also high in emotional warmth. And so these parents are likely to have very clear boundaries, but have a lot of emotional warmth, and also give space for reciprocal communication with their children, right? So there's actually space to talk about, this is the rule. Well, why is that the rule? And we can sit down and talk about, well, this is the rule because in our family, we want to make sure that you grow up safe and that you're taken care of, that you learn to contribute to the family, just like mommy and daddy are contributing to the family. So with authoritative parents, this is kind of like that Kevin Hart thing of, there's actually space. It's not this gentle, like kind of, I'm not going to have any boundaries, or It's not saying your feelings are more important than the families or the boundaries, but it's saying two things are really important here. Your feelings are really, really important here. And the boundaries and expectations and the needs of our family are really, really important here. And we're going to hold those both at the same time. So we will pick up with chapter 7 on Tuesday. I love this chapter. We'll be talking about interpersonal defenses.